sit there with you, but, so. That's kind
Well, they're not being just.
Oh, and by the way, I said, in the exact path, he sent me quotes. So I'm gonna, like, show you the differences. I think I'll put you and Ron and Jody on and break that down.
All right, I will call the meeting to order for the North Kingstown Temporary Advisory Committee on District Discipline for Monday, April 29th, 2024, at 7 p.m. Is there anyone that would like to make public comment? Seeing none and hearing none, then we'll move on to the next item, which is approval of last meeting's minutes. Did everyone have a chance to see them, read them? Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All right, all those, any discussion? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Abstentions? Motion passes. All right. First item on the agenda for old business is something we discussed last time, the committee input on some additional expertise we thought. And I know a couple people had reached out to me about, they thought it was a good discussion and important to have a mental health professional resource on the committee. I guess, and I spoke to the chair of the school committee, I spoke to the superintendent, and we just want a little more information about what specifically are you looking for, because we do have some mental health experience and professionals on the committee already, but are we looking for a specific type? Are we looking for specifically someone from one of our schools, or just a general professional? So I guess I'll open the floor for discussion about what we might be looking for. Anybody?
Well, in regards to general professional, I am a licensed therapist and oversee violence prevention and substance prevention at URI, so, but I'm not in the school, so, but I am, previously did a lot of work with DCYF systems of care, looking at trauma-informed practices, so.
Comments?
I can add some, I
Yep.
mean, I don't wanna speak for them, but I will say, I know we've been doing a lot of work trying to search for people for the high school, but Sherry and Matt do a fantastic job, our school psychologist and school social worker, but I think that we hear from, like we did from some of the students last time, and from them that they're kinda at capacity with 1,300 kids, and when, you know, any particular need is there, they're really kind of flat out, so I think that, I know that we're already looking into this as a district, but I just wanna reiterate that that's definitely a priority at the high school.
No,
Right.
about
I
adding
think
to this.
Oh,
adding
to
to
this
this
group.
committee, yeah, is what.
I apologize.
No, no, no.
Yeah,
No, I definitely agree with
Yeah.
you. It should be a priority of the district
We each
to
have an intern
to
next
add
year.
more.
oh, that's awesome, okay,
Yes, but specifically as a member of
Yeah.
this committee as it applies to the district discipline. Sure.
It's nothing,
Yep.
that was a different, problem I had when I read the equity report, was I noticed, there was no shadowing or observation, and then I, talked to someone who was, at the school committee in 2022, and they said that they barely got the permission to do the equity report, never mind have that company shadow and observe. And I just found that when I read the report, it's all interviews, it's all secondhand information. I just really wish, I mean, you can't go back in time, but I was wondering if it was possible to get that company to do observations and shadowing, you know, cause I just feel from what they reported on, in the high school, cause I'm not privy to the other schools, lacked context and degree, and I worry that if we do what the equity report asks of the superintendent, assistant superintendent, it might be counterintuitive to what we actually need. So I was just really wishing we had that observation and shadow by a non-biased party. Cause if we did it, if we switched schools and went and observed each other, we have a say in the games, I don't know.
Okay.
That was just something I wish had happened, you know.
We can talk about that more when we get to the equity audit.
Cool.
Because we're gonna talk about that specifically later
All
on.
right, thanks.
But So does anyone think that we specifically need to seek out one of our mental health professionals that are in one of our schools that deal with, you know, what we're seeing from students specifically, or?
I wasn't here when that topic was discussed. I watched the meeting, but I don't, in terms of like why this committee was specifically like created and in terms of what its charge is, I'm not sure what that voice at this table would bring to that particular charge.
Okay.
So I would say, I think their information would be valuable, however, they are a capacity, and asking them
Right.
to do anything else
Else
is, I
is-
really don't want to do that right now.
Okay.
That'd be my, and because they are the people that they are, someone would do it.
Mm.
And just add more to their plate.
Yeah.
Yeah. They definitely do see, though, the behaviors and the discipline that acts up due to social and emotional or more mental health reasons, and I think they go hand in hand, but I would agree with Rachel.
So maybe.
I just wanna ground that this is more focused on the policies versus the behaviors.
Right. So maybe if we feel later in the process, if we want to
Yes.
bring one of them in as a speaker
Yes.
to speak about the policies that we're trying to put together, then maybe that would be an appropriate time to invite one of them just for the night, or, you
Yeah.
know, to one of the
Yep.
committee meetings to come in.
Versus having.
Versus having a permanent member of the committee.
Yeah.
I think that's a great idea.
I think that's actually a great compromise.
Yes, I agree.
Okay. Then I will let the superintendent know. And the chair. Alright. So next on the agenda, I know we went over this last time. And kind of the goals of this committee, but I think we, or at least I feel like I kind of just went over them too quickly, and I really want us to focus on because there are very specific deliverables that this advisory committee is tasked with creating for the district and reporting back to the school committee. So I just wanted to kind of go over those. I know I emailed them to you. I have a few more copies if anybody wants to see them or read along. Thank you. So this is just the second page of the document of how this advisory committee was created. So the goals are solicit student input about the current disciplinary system throughout the district, which obviously we have students on the committee. One of them is here tonight. And I know several of them attended our last meeting.
And they did email us to say they
Right.
could come tonight,
Right.
so.
Draft and recommend a disciplinary matrix. So, you know, does everybody know what a disciplinary matrix is? Some do, some don't. Jen, you wanna explain? I mean, it's,
Like an explanation.
you,
Yeah, I would like an explanation.
yeah, you wanna explain?
Or no, I would like an
Oh, you want an explanation, sorry.
Sorry.
So, as far as the disciplinary matrix, it's based on the code of, the student code or whatever, the discipline code or whatever that we have. It's a matrix that says, if this behavior occurs, then this is kind of the result of what should happen. It kind of removes, or the attempt is to remove the bias out of any kind of behavioral issue that may arise. So, is that clear? Is that
Yeah,
what
it's like
there's-
if this, then that. Like,
Right.
To
That's
take
what
the
I thought.
subjective.
And it's just,
out.
yeah. So it's like, you know, so anybody, any teacher, any principal, vice principal, anyone can look up and say, okay, this is what happened, this is what has to happen next as a result of that. Examine current disciplinary policies and practices through an equity lens and make recommendations for opportunities for improvement. So part of what I sent out to the committee, in addition to the discipline section of the equity report, and if you haven't had a chance to read the entire equity report, I encourage you to do it. But I went and looked and pulled all of the student handbooks from all of the schools that I could possibly find, and their sections on discipline. I tried to put it all in mostly one document. I think DMS had a separate document that I may not, I think I sent to you, but I didn't print out tonight. Just to kind of give us a benchmark of where we are, what's currently going on, what is being presented, at least to parents and families and the public about what they can see and find, because these I just found they're on every website of every school, so you can kind of see where we're getting started. Review current restorative discipline practices being utilized in K-12 education and make recommendations for the district. Recommend equity-focused discipline training for district employees, which I know we talked about last time, having more training about discipline topics and things of that nature. Provide equity-focused professional discipline training for staff as well. Again, more training for our staff and teachers and things of that nature. So, you know, there are definitely some very specific things that we as a committee need to create. Like I said, I gave us kind of the tools to get started, the benchmark of where we're starting from. So in addition to each of the student handbooks, I also pulled any school committee policy that I could see that regarding discipline of students. So I emailed those to everyone. I think there was 3 or 4 main specific ones about kind of broad reaching about discipline in certain areas. Again, just as a starting point to see, because what we can do is when we're ready to put some of these things together, we will report this out to the school committee and make recommendations for policy changes, things that we think is in the best interest of students, obviously. Does anybody else have anything they want to add? Or I just wanted to make sure that we're really, I kind of want to go over these at the beginning of every meeting just to make sure this is what we need to do and this is our task.
We
So
had
we can-
someone, and I apologize for not remembering, that did a really nice thorough job of recommendations for like different types of curriculum and things along those lines. That's not really the purpose of this particular committee, and actually the curriculum component is being addressed by another group of teachers and administrators in the district, and they've already kind of vetted a couple of different things and made some choices about what they want to move forward with for SEL education next year. So I just wanted to make sure that whoever wrote that, they did a really nice, thorough job, but it's sort of a different branch
Right.
of this. Yeah. I didn't want them to be disappointed.
Right. Yeah. Right. Anyone else? Move on.
Can I ask a question about
sure.
the discipline matrix created for one separate for every school, for every level, one kind of overarching, what does that look like, just the scope of that?
I think that's something that we can decide as
We
the
decide?
committee.
Okay.
I mean, if you notice, at least amongst the elementary schools, they all pretty much use one standard elementary school handbook. And kind of all agree on that. The middle schools each have their own, which are slightly different, and obviously the high school has its own because they deal with other issues and problems that they see at the high school.
Okay.
So I think that we can make that recommendation as we see fit. So I don't think we have to be tied to it. But one thing, I also don't think we have to reinvent the wheel, so we can look at other schools and what they're doing. You know, as I'm often doing, going down a rabbit hole of doing research on Google and typing in stuff like that. You can find lots of examples of lots of different schools out there and the types of discipline policies and procedures and things that they have. So,
I do think when we talk about equity though, which is what we're here to discuss, when we are talking about the middle schools, they do have 2 different discipline policies. They have a lot of different things in the middle schools in general, and I think one thing that we should consider in this committee is having those middle schools be the same. The elementary schools are 99% the same, and it's my opinion that the middle school should be as well. You shouldn't get a different experience as far as discipline depending on which middle school you go to.
Yeah, I'd like
Agreed.
to bounce off that. When I was in middle school, I had a terrible time because the discipline matrix was very different from every other middle school, and I think we can work on a disciplinary matrix for the high school North Kingston High School specifically now, but then as we're working on ours, we can figure out what would we be able to apply to a middle school disciplinary matrix as well, like maybe form them at the same time or like take different ideas and like work with them.
Is there other comments? Yep.
The other issue we had in the high school the past like 20 years is when we had discipline matrix, they always like had it mapped out, but then they led to an outcome that no one would ever implement. So it ended up being this like gaslighty venture of that like students would exhaust the matrix and then have no discipline outcomes because like we'd have the matrix and then it was supposed to like lead somewhere and then they'd be, well, we can't do that. And I'd always be like, then why do you have it on the matrix?
Right.
And it was just like, it was like, it's why like, the other thing like PD, like it should be specific like restorative practices, like in the high school currently, like our trigger words are matrix and restorative practices, and I believe it's because they haven't been utilized properly, because if they've been utilized properly, they'd actually be positive things that we'd look at positively, but it's end up being like matrix that lead nowhere, and then restorative practice has been more like accommodations, exemptions, instead of restorative practice, which is the antithesis of that. So that would be definitely like training, and that would be the big thing.
Can I ask, so the other committee that's formed for like the SEL, it would be in tandem with the discipline policy, or would that decision on an SEL curriculum impact the disciplinary matrix? And like thinking of what
Yeah.
you said with, restorative, so after a punishment has been given, would there be would the restorative piece be part of our matrix? Or is that, like, that's the disciplinary policy for matrix ends and then the SEL picks up? Is that correct?
No, I get it.
Yeah, I know
I
what you're
understand,
saying.
I just
I
don't know
see
the
what
answer.
you're
I
saying.
think the systems, right now they have conscious discipline in some of the elementary schools. If they continue that, it marries really well with restorative practices. And that could become part of a disciplinary matrix, which is what do you do now to, depending on what happened and what behavior occurred, what do you do now to, develop, restore your relationships with other people, apologize, whatever it is that we want them to do that's meaningful, right? So I think they marry each other, but it's not one is contingent on the other per se.
If the SEL curriculum team works to create it's almost like the beginning of, like the foundation of, in my mind, I don't see how we can make, particularly with the specific goal of looking into restorative practices, I don't see how we can not have that in our matrix that we recommend, which would be steps to restore harm, right? Like, what does that look like in practice? But the SEL committee, I feel like we're gonna have to talk, because if they're not, almost in my mind, it's like what they're doing is working on in the classroom, relationship building, feeling safe, feeling like, because otherwise you're not gonna, I think I said this last time, like you won't wanna restore harm in a place that you don't care about anybody about. So I don't see how we can work separately, but I do see how we can have our own part of it. I don't know if that makes
Just to
What-
clarify, there's not an actual SEL committee like this sitting at the
Got
table
it.
at the school committee level. Rachel, can you
Got it.
clarify what you actually
No,
mean by
those
that?
are, it's teachers and, I think Rob Mesnati and Jody Clark are participating. They worked with, the building principals and some teachers to look at curriculum.
So like, what's taught in, not necessarily like community building and pedagogy, but looking at what books were read and what how we apply the
Yeah,
standards.
they're actually looking for
Okay.
an overall curriculum to implement within the school and looking for the time in which to implement it. So they're looking at for
Like a s-
lessons and things like that.
Oh, an SEL curriculum,
Curriculum, yeah.
but that's not.
That's why Jody and Rob are involved in that.
The
That's my
only
understanding.
other big problem too, that like you do have some cross-pollination, is that, like, for example, with equity, a content-based curriculum and equity really doesn't go together. It should be more of a skills-based
Correct.
curriculum for equity, And then, And then like with something like plagiarism, like we give right now like a draconian 0, and that would maybe be better to have like restorative practice with that. So that's like academics. So that kind of goes into discipline, because when a student plagiarized, they're like written up and called home and stuff. So that's what I mean by it's kind of, especially in the high school, it gets
Yeah.
a little muddled, you know?
And there are opportunities for students and their families to kind of choose between an action
Yeah.
when they've done something at the high school level. So just as an example, if they're caught with maybe nicotine or a substance, there's a choice between like what the matrix says versus engaging in kind of like education on why not to do that in the future. So there is a little bit of a marrying, I guess, at our level, but I don't know.
They go hand in hand, so,
Yeah.
and then there's looking at, on top of that, what are the interventions, which is
Yeah.
where you get to your skills.
Yeah.
So there's a lack of, in general, interventions being provided at the tier 1, which is the curriculum itself, which is certainly,
Mhm.
but then what do we do for
Mhm.
tier 2, tier 3? There's not a lot of that going on right now. It's there in pieces, but it's not there comprehensively. So that's where you get to what Andrew was talking about, like the skill building. What is the skill that you need to learn? Why did you make that choice? How, like, if you're talking about plagiarism, why did you make that choice? And what is it that you were missing? What was the lagging skill that you didn't
Mhm.
have that needed to be, maybe you needed help with and you didn't know where to go? So we look at that. Or is it just a whim that happened? So it's looking at those different skills, and that goes at all levels. We have to teach these skills.
But like I said, like the reason why I was bringing that up is because like it ties in with equity, because you got to reach out to the parents, and then if the parents aren't, you know, primary English speakers, so you got to make sure they have a translator, and then you got to reach out in a certain dynamic. So you're not like making sure to reach out to tell them, you're reaching out to like have a discussion with them. So that would be kind of like what we were talking about with equity, with discipline, like, you know, to not be telling parents all the time what's going on, be more like, hey, this happened, what would you like to
Including
bring to
parents.
the table? And that's why with academics, it's kind of part of it too. You know, if your kid's failing academically, like, do we just tell the parent like, hey, they plagiarized, it's a 0, you have to deal with it? Or do we contact them and be like, hey, we had this happen, what would you like to have happen? And let's all get to the table. And that's where equity comes into it, because there's some parents who work, or some parents who don't speak, you know, or they don't feel like they're gonna be listened to, so, you know what I mean? So that's why it's kinda cross-pollinated,
Mhm.
you know, with equity, so.
Ready? So that is probably a perfect segue into our next item is to review the equity audit discipline section of the equity audit. Did everyone have a chance to read it? Did everyone, I know I threw a lot of information at you, and it's not that we're gonna, you know, go through it like every little word tonight, you know, obviously, this is a process that we have to go through, but, so, equity, they presented this to us was it last year when the company came back?
I think so, yes.
Okay. Yeah, so they came back to the school committee last year and gave us kind of the results of the equity audit that had been done. I don't know, I don't wanna forget your comment about the shadowing thing, but I don't know that there's an opportunity to do that at this point, is there? Or,
Well, so just to,
I don't know the process.
so just to touch on that, that was not part of the audit. The audit was a statistical review of data, like it didn't involve any of that. It involved like focus groups, it involved interviews, it involved review of the data. That was not something that was offered, and it wasn't something that was asked for. I can tell you just based on, at the time, in terms of the cost, I barely got the audit through at the cost that it was. Whether that was something that they could have provided, I don't know. But the issue in terms of the numbers is a hard review of data, like it's a statistical issue, not a, like a shadowing issue, like it's just the reviewed number and it's a hard number review, so
Yeah.
I'm not sure like what.
Well, my problem is when I was reading the data from the interviews in the committees, sometimes like what really happened in context degree isn't what happened when you interview someone, so that's why like it gets very hard, you know, when you play the telephone game, like something bad always happens, and that's what I feel like happens sometimes when you like interview someone. They might not take culpability, or they might literally remember it that way. Like that's what happens. That's why eyewitness accounts is like the lowest rated form of evidence in a prosecution trials, because like people just remember stuff wrong, even if they're trying to be, you know.
Can you expound on that a little bit more? I'm not sure I understand what you're saying.
Like in some of the reports, they talked about students feeling like the teacher or the administrator was like out to get them and like saying like racially charged verbiage to them, and that they were feeling persecuted. And then I have been like in the hallway in the high school and seen, you know, what is it, someone in the poverty, equity, you know, minority category, and they'll like say something happened that didn't. So it's just like, that's why I always think it's good to like be in an environment and see it like just firsthand before somebody describes it. That's why I thought of that.
So are you saying that you don't believe that bias-based bullying is happening?
Oh yeah, I believe it's much more complicated than some of the people who interviewed stated. Like from what I've been in the hall, like when I'm doing lab duty and stuff, it's much more nuanced.
How can you explain how it's nuanced?
It's like small little infractions. It's what I said last time. Small little infractions are ignored, and then when something bigger happens, then it's not ignored, and then a huge discipline comes down, so that a student doesn't learn that they're doing something wrong. They just get this big dramatic moment of a big punishment, when there were a lot of little moments that they should have been talked about, that they weren't following norms of the school. So like we've had, like for example, a student is like wandering the halls during class time for prolonged periods of time, and then they're just talked to, or that's with lack of transparency. That's all we're told as the teacher is they were talked to, and then they do it again, and they do it again, and then one time they do something in the bathroom that's bad, and then they get suspended. So like all the times they were outside of class, if there was more of a pushback on that, then it probably the big thing wouldn't have happened.
But that's not a bias-based bullying incident that you're describing.
Okay.
I just want to clarify, like, because I heard what you said to me first was that it's more nuanced when it comes to bias-based bullying. What you're describing is like a separate discipline incident.
Okay.
What I heard you say, and I don't know if this is what you meant, was that when you read the audit, is that in some of the interviews, it was taking the perspective of the person, obviously, who was being interviewed, but the real life situation was much more nuanced and had more sides to it.
Yeah.
Than what they interpreted. Just like if someone said they hated me, they don't like me, that's why this occurred, versus this is the discipline I received.
Yeah.
That's what I heard you say at first, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
Okay, and
Does that
it makes sense, but I just
So-
want to make sure that when
Yeah.
we're talking about bias-based incidents, it's important to recognize that we're hearing the voices of the people who are experiencing those incidents, and that we need to start from a place of believing those victims.
Yeah. Well, I would never. That's literally what I mean about interviews and discussion. Is you don't say that person's lying. What you're saying is that when you're in something emotionally, you don't see the full context of the situation, as if some outside observer was just observing it. That's the whole point. I'm not saying they're lying. I'm not saying they shouldn't be believed. but like everything, it should be like like questioned and looked at, not attacked, but you know.
Is it like a primary source?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
Of one person's,
Exactly.
the victim's perspective.
Yeah, you're not saying they're
Yeah.
lying, it's like they might not notice other things going on, like, for example, they might feel like they're being attacked and the person who's attacking them might be like de-escalating a situation with like 5 students and they just heard what that was said to them, they didn't see how the other person was getting all emotional because there were 4 other people who were that person, so it's just like, when you're in it, like you just miss elements of it.
Okay, I think I understand your point, thank you.
I have like this, so many thoughts right now, but, you know, when I think of like, you know, acceptable standards of behavior and those like little incidents where you just let them go, sometimes I'm trying to be sensitive to different, students' backgrounds, and I'm giving them a little bit wider berth, like to, you know, because I think maybe at home they tend to speak more loudly at home, or they, might dress more like provocatively at home, right, as opposed to like what I think is an appropriate dress. I mean, and we have a strict dress code that I see and I can read, but also like acceptable behavior. And I think sometimes, I mean, it's, you know, in an attempt to be very equitable, I might hold off, and then eventually it kind of escalates because I didn't hold the child accountable for that little infraction immediately, you know, like right away, so that it escalates, and then another teacher down the hall is like yelling at the student for misbehaving when, you know, I probably could have caught it a little earlier. It's like a little confession, like, but maybe that's with more, like, training and professional development, yeah, and conversations.
I'd like to give my input, because bias-based bullying is when someone is bullying another student based off of something that they are, like their race or their ethnicity or their gender or whatever, like, that's the basis, that's like what it is. So if someone, say, like a kid is standing there and another kid just yelled a slur at them, that's black and white, that is not okay, that should not be ignored. Like, they don't need to be punished right then and there, but like even out of context, something like that should, like, little things, if they're not addressed right away at the first instance of an offense, the person who's bullied should be able to say, there were little things before this, so, like, when the person who bullied them is disciplined, the victim should be taken into account, like, all the little things that have happened before then, and it shouldn't be like the discipline that the person who bullied them gets shouldn't be lesser because the victim isn't believed based off of like what is just recorded and what isn't. Does that make sense?
I think, what I think I heard you say is that, that it should be taken into account when there's other little things behind it, even though those things might not have been reported
Yeah,
until the
exactly,
bigger incident occurred.
Yeah.
Is that what
That's
I
what
heard
I'm
you
trying
say?
to explain.
Yeah.
So like even if it isn't addressed right away, it should be taken into account. Like is basically what I'm trying to say. I think I like talked about this right at the end of the last session, and that's when my thoughts were like really clear in what I was saying. And now I'm just trying to like piece it together while I'm answering, but that's basically what I'm saying.
So adding that into the context of
Yeah,
the-
exactly,
this,
exactly.
of what has actually occurred.
Yeah.
Is it in the, sorry,
No, no.
is it in the purview of this committee to, we're making the recommendations about handbook matrix on like an administrative level. Will we be, or do we get to decide with, protocols within the classroom for classroom teachers that are very clear? You know, is that what we're talking about, getting down to that level?
Well,
Hopefully.
I think the handbook tells like first offense, second offense, pretty
But
clearly.
like, you know, before, yeah, so like, before like a detention, it's like, you hear this, who do you need to talk to? Yeah, like what level of, are we getting to, and
No,
we
it's
get to
just
decide?
higher, it's up here,
Kind-
policy
District.
level.
Yeah.
Dr. can
Just
probably
check it.
explain it better than I can, but just one thing I just wanna remind everybody, that the data in the equity audit, it basically says, offense A, you commit offense A, you're a white person, you
You're
are
less likely.
disciplined this amount of times. You commit data A, you are a black person, you are disciplined 7 times the amount. So it's irrelevant what the offense is. It is statistically proven that our children of color are being disciplined more often. And that's why we're here, because whatever the offense is, whatever the punishment is, it's being inequitably enforced. And that's what the issue is.
So when I interpreted it, my thought came to me that certain, like students, like the black student, is disobeying, or like disobeying, because that's discipline, right? Like there's a code and you need it, and then there's a discipline for not doing the right thing 7 times.
No.
No.
It says
Okay,
that,
it's another one.
no, it is saying that for the same offense, a black student is 7 times more likely to be disciplined for that offense than a white student.
Same thing with males, same thing with
Yeah.
Socioeconomic background,
Yeah.
Our
So
free and
students
reduced
with
lunch.
free or reduced lunch
Yes.
population.
and
So-
special ed.
And special
And
ed.
special ed,
I
yes.
was just
So it's
wondering
not
if
that-
it's a male student who's African American, low income, and on special needs,
Yeah,
are they all?
you're up here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but is that,
Counting.
could that one person, we keep getting, that one same person get multiple
No,
suspensions?
they pulled out the unique identifier, so
Did-
yeah.
Did they use the RIDE data?
No, they used our data.
Okay, because if they use the data that gets reported to RIDE, that would be one student would count in multiple areas.
No, they used our data, so they
Right, cause
isolated
I've
it.
used the ride and it's like, you took 5 kids that hit all these things, and if you took those 5 out, all the other numbers go down because that one person represents each category.
Right,
Mhm.
which would be that would be the case if they'd be higher level, right?
Right.
So like in the very beginning, we talked about a mental health person on the committee. Has the committee, have we like actively sought out like a more diverse, like other people of diversity on this committee? Like no socio,
It was,
like,
there was it went out to the entire district and to the families, and people filled out whether or not they want to, join, and not everyone was chosen. They tried to pick from different types of,
Yeah.
like, from the high school, from this type of job, things like that.
Teachers versus parents.
Teachers versus parents
Versus-
versus.
We did not get
students.
diverse.
Every student they
Okay.
accepted.
And
They
it could-
accepted every student though.
okay.
So
And I know at the
view it-
sorry.
I was just gonna say, from an outsider perspective, I view it as when I look at the charge of this committee and then I read the data that was pulled in that audit, is that our job is to put in the structure in place that levels the playing field when we talk about discipline. So when we talk about a matrix, we talk about something that is, again, when I was reviewing everything, when I was looking, even the difference, like my children go to Quinnesset, right? So I was looking, I went and I looked at Davisville Middle School, cause I know that's where they're gonna go next, and then you look at Wickford Middle School, and it's just the fact, and then they're all going to the same high school.
Right.
And so I think it's understanding that, like, looking, to me, there is no backbone in the district when it looks at the overall vision of discipline, and also looking as an even playing field. Like, you read the audit and it is, like, to me, it was shocking, and based on what I do for a living, unfortunately, believable data, and also looking at, again, like, why are there more reports for Black students or more students who have a disability? And it's because when you look at your internal biases and people aren't trained on their own internal biases, they're much more likely to discipline that person without checking their own biases at the door, basically. But that's how am I understanding correctly, like, the charge?
Yes.
Yes, yep,
Yeah.
yep.
I do wanna say this. I wanna say that I believe the data, absolutely. I've been working in schools for a long time, and it's a trend everywhere. I would also say that sometimes what you're saying occurs too. So some of those students may have gotten many reminders prior, and then the big thing happens, kinda what Andrew was saying too, a big thing happens, and then they get that big consequence. And I think there's a level of frustration that occurs. At the same time, do I think there's a lack of, I don't think there's a lack of empathy. I think there's a lack of understanding if you're coming from a trauma-based background or a low socioeconomic, what does that impact? And what does that look like on how you behave in school, or what your expectations are at school? And what is it like if you go home and there's no one there to help you do your work? And how does that lead to frustration, which happens at a school, which leads to more behavior? Because the behavior and academics go hand in hand. Does that make sense to you? So I get a little I get concerned that we don't know from the hard data, we don't know how many other things occurred for those students that got consequenced. So was a white student given many more skill building things, or were those students that are in any of those subcategories, were they given many other interventions prior to that consequence? And then people are frustrated and made it too much. I don't know.
But that's kind of the point, because let's say that the student was given 12 chances beforehand, and they're still that much higher, that's even more of a problem. So, I mean, all we can do is work with the hard numbers, and from
Yep,
the
I
hard
agree.
numbers that we have, there is clearly an issue with the way our discipline data as it is being enforced.
So I just had a question on the data. We don't know, were all these, I'm just looking at this particular one that just says race, where it says all students, 3,900. Students with disciplinary referrals, 463. That's the entire referral of our district was 463.
Which page are you on?
47. Because, and I guess is, to me, I wanna look at if,
I wanna make sure I'm on the same page as you, that's not mine, 47.
47.
Students with disciplinary, 463.
That's under key findings,
Okay,
district-wide
yeah,
discipline.
Go ahead.
Got it.
that's saying an entire district for that school year, there was only 463.
No, there were more, they pulled it out so that those are the number of unique let me see.
This analysis includes all type of infractions, inappropriate behavior, interrupting class, excessive tardiness.
There were more referrals, but those were the number of students who had
So
referrals.
some of those.
So it could be-
They could have multiple.
Yeah, those 463s are repeats,
Okay.
yeah,
Because I'm just saying,
Oh,
I've
okay.
worked in districts where
yeah.
you get a couple of thousand referrals.
Oh,
on
yeah,
Christmas.
no, because it's 30, those are the total number of students, and those are the number of students who had disciplinary
Okay.
referrals.
We just, and we don't know, were these all the same referrals? Like, in other words, if every kid got into a fight, did every kid get suspended? Or do we say everybody got into a fight, we suspended you, you went back to class? And I think, I'm trying to figure out, like, if it's all the same referral, then here's your data that says, okay, this population got into fights and we let all more white kids not get suspended and more black kids get suspended. But if one kid got into a fight and he got suspended, and this kid threw his pencil across the room and he got suspended, to me, that's where we're not looking at what was the reason why they got suspended.
So this analysis includes all types of infractions. Consequences
This still
resulting
seems
from the
low.
infraction are considered disciplinary referrals, but it does not break it out by
I mean,
fighting versus language. And that is something that we can ask for. If that-
I'm just looking at
Incident-based.
what is the incident that led to suspension?
Yeah,
You know, this person was caught smoking 5 times, they got suspended. This person was caught smoking once, they got suspended.
yeah, I mean,
Right.
that's
There's your-
something that
there's
we
your
can
bias
ask
as
for,
opposed to
but,
just
yeah.
race or-
Yeah. Cause I also would be interested to see like like when you look at suspensions, you look at in school versus out of school, and then you look at the major, like physical fights, substance use, seeing what were the outcomes of, like, if you identify, say, 4 major, I was gonna say crimes, but infractions, right, in the high school, what were the outcomes of those?
That is something that RIDE does
Okay.
break it down by
Yeah.
it's different data than this, but
Yeah.
RIDE does break it down by that level.
I mean, I just know I've been in school systems where I hate handbooks that were like, students late 3 times, they get an office referral, they skip the office referral, they get 2 office referrals, they skip that, they got suspended. So every 10 days that a kid comes in late, they just keep getting suspended.
Yeah, that's
So
what
we took the bias out of it, but we really didn't help the student
That's
because
what
they
we
keep
had.
coming in.
That was our matrix right there.
So,
Yeah.
So, it sounds like we should request more data then.
I mean, it doesn't have to have student names, I'm not looking
Well,
for
no,
that
no, no,
specific.
and I don't think it would. It would be completely,
It would be interesting to know what are the most common yeah, referrals or infractions or whatever the language is.
Would it surprise me if more special ed kids with behavior problems got suspended more? No. I mean, we can go along with, is it part of their disability, and then we start going down that road, but it would not surprise me if there was what is that level of behavior, because that student has behavior issues or extreme, social emotional issues. So I'm just trying to tease out what those would be when looking at this. That's all.
So I guess in order to help me make this request, give me a little more detail. So we're looking for in different types of infraction, like what specifically happened?
Or why students getting in trouble. Are they getting
That, like,
referrals?
why, like the top?
So we're only
5
talking about
reasons.
kids really that got suspended. Everything that we're focusing on is the end result, the end consequence was an out-of-school suspension on all 4 of these categories: race, gender, social, economic, and
But this is just for students with disciplinary referrals.
Why are they
Yeah,
getting
just
referred?
referred,
Yeah, this is,
but not necessarily consequence. That's what I was trying to explain before, like,
I referred 2 students today for being disruptive in class after multiple, reminders and,
So once they're referred, I guess what happens?
Which is one of the reasons that I asked the question about in class, because I think it's important to know who's, we can look at what happens when they're sitting in front of whoever the person is, right, that has to dole out the whatever we say in the matrix, but who's getting to them, who's being sent out of class. You know what I mean? Like, if we don't look at what's going on in the classroom, or if we don't, at least, like we were talking about anti-bias training, and which actually I was gonna ask, what has there been any, what has that been? That's information that I'd like to, okay. Like, you know what I'm saying, we can do the school level administrative recommendations, but there will still be, if we don't deal with in the classroom, who's being kicked out.
Well, and can I add to that? Like, when we do look at the data and review it, at least I can only speak for my level. I hate to say it like this, but there's often trends of what teachers are always writing up students versus which ones are not. And that's why I think that it is important for us to know, like, when there's a referral, then there's a responsibility at our level, the dean or the student assistant principal of student services, to then follow up with that consistently based on the matrix. So I think really it does start with what is best practices in the classroom and what is getting to the referral process, and then also targeting, this is probably a building level thing for all of us to do, but analyzing at the admin level, what is happening in classrooms and where are the trends in terms of referrals. So.
But that's actually interesting, Jack, because 90 students, it went from 430, whatever the number was, to 90 who actually got suspended. So
Right.
of that 90, is it 3 teachers? Is it
I'm curious, right?
25 teachers?
Right.
Is it because that could change things, potentially,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Is it a school-wide problem? Is it a teacher-wide problem? Is it
Yeah.
Or is it clear
And where's the
classroom
support
protocols?
needed? Right.
You know what I mean? I don't care if a kid doesn't do whatever. Oh, well,
I
you
do,
know,
and
Yes.
where are those
Yeah.
inconsistencies and how can we make it clear?
And that's what I wonder too. It's a really great point, because some of the things I know we're talking about at our building is how are we making sure that we're not micromanaging versus being very clear with expectations. And sometimes we put a policy in place and we have to, say, this policy is there, you can go all the way to it, but we also suggest what's in the best interest of students. And so sometimes you have, and I always assume everybody has best intentions, so sometimes you have the teachers who are really following that protocol because that's what's there and what's written, and then others who are maybe nuancing it more, and then that's sometimes where the variable happens even. So I think there's a couple different layers, but I do think it would be valuable information to look at.
And the other problem we had in the high school too was logistical and technology, because the past 8 years, teachers need to communicate to teachers when they're doing something, when they're having a conversation with a student, so you have context and degree for everything. So then we were told to put it in Aspen as a conduct referral with a claims as to the parent and the dean, non-parent issue, just record keeping. So that kind of skewed the data for that we were told to do that for 4 years, so that like messed things up, because then we had a bunch of referrals that weren't referrals, they were literally, we were told to use that system to record keep, because, and like Aspen has something else to use, which we should be using, but we weren't for a while. So then like parents were calling and being like, why is my kid getting a slight on their permanent record for this little thing, like not having their Chromebook or something? And it was like, no, we were told to like just document
Yeah.
that this kid never comes with their Chromebook and always wants to go to their locker to get it. So it wasn't like a discipline issue, it was just like they're never in class, they're always in the hallway type of thing, I'm just having a conversation with it. So that was logistical, a nightmare, that was like what we were told to do like off and on for like the past 4 years, which now we don't do anymore, but that skews the data, you know.
But they are doing it in other schools.
Yeah.
They're told to do that, but then some teachers will do that and other teachers
Yeah,
don't wanna
exactly.
bother.
Yeah.
And it includes referrals where they just handle it in the classroom.
Yeah,
Right.
So it's like this,
Yeah.
it's very, and when you read them, it's,
So, like, mine today was teacher handles. They're gonna
yeah,
serve
you
a bunch
took
of
care of
teachers.
it, yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's documented as a referral.
yeah, so.
Yeah,
Andrew,
that's-
on that, you had a really good idea when you and I chatted, wasn't it the journal,
Yeah,
like
you use the journal in Aspen.
yeah.
The way to keep
So-
records to like just help students, you know, just have conversations with them.
Yeah, it's not a referral, but it's a
Yeah.
record, so I did put
Just,
that on
it's
our,
just behavioral record keeping of like,
yeah,
Andrew, you come every day, you come late, and then you have to put your backpack away, and then you're in the hallway wandering, what can we help you to like get to class, cause like it's not helping you right
And I'm still sort of thinking like, okay, the student has a punishment with a discipline matrix, but then thinking, it's like that PBIs, it was me, right, thinking like, so how is that student going to get to class on time next time? Or like, what is the support for that behavior? And maybe at the high school, it's that choice, it's like, so parent, this is what's happening, what do you want to do this or that? Or, and maybe with more education on this, on teachers' parts, like how are we gonna prevent that from happening again? Like the punishment is just the punishment, they're
Yeah.
right,
annoyed for a
what's the
day.
root cause?
If we
If
go
they
all the
show
way with
up-
the restorative piece, then every teacher knows, well, why is it a problem that they're late? It's not because they didn't follow a rule, it's
Yeah.
because they're interrupting other people's learnings, they're missing learning, their voice is important in the classroom. Let's all sit around and talk about it, and it's like, it sounds like kumbaya and everything, but they have to go through the understanding of, okay, when I'm late, it messes up me, you, them, because. And it's like, it's hard, but I feel like that's where we have a place where we can really say, put it down and be like, some sort of restorative circle, some sort of restorative something.
Yeah.
To explain the cause
And
and
then-
effects
explain.
Yeah.
between.
And then who is the lead on that? Would that be, I
Great
mean, it
question.
could be the teacher,
Right.
you know,
Yeah.
So
And
If they're
I'm sorry.
trained.
Okay. I'm sorry. I was gonna say, there's some really good information out there. Ross Green is well known for behavior, and he talks all the time about what are the lagging skills and unmet needs that in general are fueling behavior. And identifying those, and that's the skill building that you give. What is the lagging skill? What do they not know how to do? And what is it that they're trying to get that they're not, don't have that need met? What is
Is
happening?
that part of the matrix that we would put in, like I'm saying, like the restorative part where they have an understanding, they have to look you in the eye and say, I interrupted class, I missed out on my learning, like that, we can add that in as a step, right? If we
like
do.
that's very PBIS-ish, like that's, you know, Glasser's choice theory, you know,
Yeah.
it's conscious discipline or developmental design.
And just as anecdotal pieces on this, I don't know what the answer is, I'm just giving this perspective. I have often seen, now I don't personally give discipline, that's not my role, but what I have seen is when the opportunity is given to the student or the family, like you can take this or take this, I would say 95% of the time, they take the consequence instead of the restorative practice.
It's harder.
Most of the time, a student will say, I want to be suspended instead of sitting through that course, because I want to go home. I want a little vacation. So I also wonder how we can tighten that up or just consider that. And it would be much better to probably speak to those who actually give the discipline because they can give you the statistics. But from what I've heard, they always choose, I'd rather just sit through the detention than do that piece.
About vaping specifically, right, isn't it?
A lot of
That's the
vaping,
one.
other things too, but I would say, yeah, specifically kind of the
So it's
health
more of
training.
a quicker,
I think so. I
To
think
get
it's like,
over
let's just check it off,
the
or I'm gonna go
consequence
home and I
quicker.
don't have to, you know what I mean, I don't have to come to school. So I wonder how we can kinda like play with that a little bit.
Well, it's also because like we kept the old label for the punishment, but we abandoned what it used to be. Like, I'm not saying it was a right practice, but what it used to be was you were suspended, you got a 0 for everything, so that if you got suspended too many times, you had to repeat the grade because there was no social promotion. So that's
Oh.
why they had suspension back in the day, and it wasn't good because it made people drop out and everything. But that's why like suspension was a big stick. Like, so we still call it a suspension, but like you said, they get to make up all their work and everything. So I'm not saying suspensions are right. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that we shouldn't even still have that on the table. You know, like there should be some other solution, because if you're gonna label something a suspension, which is really just a vacation, then that's not a suspension. So,
It sounds like the high school does a little bit more of, you can have this, even if they're choosing the easy way out, give me the 3-day suspension. But maybe, and I don't know if it's happening at the younger grades where they're not, maybe it's like the mother or the adult at home is probably gonna say, no, I want my child to learn, he's 9 or she's 6 or whatever, and
yeah,
like, yeah, but like, I mean, you can,
yeah.
like if it starts young, at the, you know, and they
Mhm.
realize, wow, I came out and I could save face and my classmates accepted my apology and then we were all
Mm.
good and the teacher liked me again or whatever the,
Yeah.
like, are the elementary, like Quintessence doing that a little bit, it sounded like, is that right?
They're doing conscious discipline at
Yeah.
Knesset, yep.
That's great.
So what data would be helpful
right?
for us?
And it's all data, and this is again, me just asking, is it all stored in Aspen?
Well, so here's my next question. So we have the data that was provided for the equity audit. I have no idea where that data, like, whether it was like,
What's the,
whether it's
the
still-
raw data?
Yeah, like whether that is still kept somewhere in like this is the stuff we gave the equity people, or whether it would have to be repopulated. Then there is also data that is provided to RIDE that lives on the RIDE website. So I think if we're talking apples to apples, it makes the most sense to try to see if the equity data still lives in an equity data folder somewhere that was provided.
It's been a while since I did this, a couple of districts ago, but it should still be in Aspen. You're just gonna sort by it for the year. So obviously, we're looking at this school year, which is the 21-22. And there's like, you could either do it as a pie chart or bar graph. You wanna know what the infractions were. We had 250 kid tardies, we had 75, fights, we had 2,000 insubordinations, and then you.
We definitely still have that in Aspen. I'm just talking about like this specific data that was culled and pulled.
Right, so you could just sort it through Aspen for that school year, and it'll tell you all the infractions and then what the result was of it. I mean, looking at the male to female, like, ratio, it's like they're 50-50, but, boys are 3 times more likely to get
But they already
suspended.
went through and pulled for specific, like this was specifically like pulled out for the unique student identifier. You know what I mean? The stuff that's in Aspen is not, so somebody would have to go through and do
Okay.
that work,
Okay.
again, already.
I
Because
think we should be able to get the raw data from this particular,
That's what I'm-
sent,
that's-
and then
Whatever was
decipher
sent
that a
over
little bit
to them.
differently.
that's what I'm
Yeah.
thinking, like I think if we could get our hands on that, it would be best, because it's gonna be apples to apples, whereas the stuff that's in Aspen is, like, if student X is in here 27 times, we're gonna get the record 27 times.
Yes.
We only
sure.
want the ones, and
Mhm.
Right.
So then it's just asking the superintendent to find that data, to see if it still exists.
someone handed that someone over.
Yeah.
Maybe,
I mean, since he's new, he may have to go search for it himself.
right.
But I would imagine Mike Waterman might.
Right, and we may be
Yes,
able
sir.
to ask PCG to give it back to us. Maybe we gave it to them.
Okay.
I do think a role of something, and I don't want to lose this thought, is coming up with common definitions. Because when I read insubordination and I read through infractions for insubordination, it's very,
Like, what defines this?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was confused by that as well, reading.
I need to
Yeah,
move off, but I
and
agree.
when I've actually live read them, and I'm kinda going, I'm not sure if I would define that as insubordination.
Even
The
the ones in
student
the
getting
student
frustrated and
one.
putting their head down and not doing what was asked. Yeah, I guess technically that's insubordination, but they obviously were showing frustration and being upset. It's not really a telling the teacher, no, I'm not gonna do what you wanna do. So I feel like there needs to be some more nuance around our definitions, and we may need to add, with that, add categories into Aspen, cause you have very few choices.
Well, there's
RIDE
probably like,
RIDE has defined definitions. Aren't they supposed to match?
You would hope, and I think we should take a look at right definitions too.
I think Aspen has a long list, it has a long list of, infractions.
Definitely needs more.
But we, like, I know at my school, we're recommended to either use insubordination or,
Disrespect is usually the two.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
Yeah, so and I'm like, I don't know if the dirt, like,
yeah,
So you choose?
yeah, and then I explain a little bit what happened.
yeah.
Yeah, there's like
And then
36
teacher
different
handles
job
usually.
things to choose from.
At the school I work at, everybody has to choose all conduct at entry, and then whenever it gets to where it gets to, they redo it, like anybody.
That's interesting.
Oh, so it's coded
Yeah.
correctly?
So I do think
One
there's an
person codes and
issue
they're saying-
with that
Yeah.
too, just
Yeah.
as a thought.
Are there other, I mean, is it Aspen, or that's bigger than just our documentation of behavior,
I
right?
wouldn't be shocked if it was an Aspen thing. Aspen's
Yeah, there's some pieces of Aspen are we can customize and
Okay.
fix, and it may already be there, we just haven't asked for it to come out,
Alright,
if that makes sense. And there is an Aspen users group, so all of us that use Aspen get together and talk about the forms and things that we use, not necessarily always the discipline stuff, but there can be decisions that are made, and when we make them together, then the company will actually update Aspen. If you do it individually, they do charge you a customization fee. But a lot of the stuff that you see in there is what other districts may be using, and that you may not use, but you may just be using these 5 things, but someone else might be using 40. But they're there for your choice.
I just feel like when I use Aspen, a lot of the verbiage is like archaic. Like when you do report cards, they have a comment that like poor attitude and effort, like that's just so, ugh. Like I would never use it, cause I'm just like, poor attitude and effort, so then a parent just thinks it's poor attitude when you really wanna talk about somebody who's not putting a sincere effort into something, so, you know, I personally never use the comment, cause to combine attitude and effort like that makes a parent call you and be like, what is my kid doing, are they rude? No, they're not rude, they're just not trying, you know, how do I, this, I
So
would
those
rather have a
things, you
comment
should
there.
let, like, the administration know, so that, cause they could bring that to that user group to talk as a discussion. I actually think those are customizable to the district, I think. I'm
Well,
pretty
not this
sure.
current administration, but I have emailed administration every year about comments that need to be changed. So, I have not done it with the current administration, but the past administration can speak to how many emails I send about customizing the Aspen comment and verbiage.
And I would say some of the ones from RIDE are pretty archaic too, so definitions. I'm not going out on a limb by saying that. They haven't been updated in a long time.
So is the equity data that we turned over to PCG, is that was already broken down into subgroups of, you know, socioeconomic differences, racial differences, or did they do that themselves?
No, I think that we gave them, cause it came out of our Aspen, so it would have been coded with whatever we coded.
Okay.
I would have been surprised if they didn't hand in this report with that data, though, with that disaggregated data of how they came up with those numbers. So there must be some type of packet
Wait,
of I said I'd be surprised if they submitted a report without the disaggregated data to support it. So I
No,
wonder,
everything that,
they put it on the report?
yeah, everything that
Okay.
we got is in the report, yeah.
So we're just looking for the raw data. Right.
But I think we want the raw data broken out further, correct, by,
That was my next.
What was
By-
the infraction then?
By infraction.
have to run, so my children are gonna.
Birthday
No,
party.
Yeah,
no,
birthday
I
day.
can't.
Yeah,
Yes.
happy birthday.
Well, thank
Oh,
you.
happy birthday.
Um,
If you get you something more fun.
Yeah, well, one of my kids wants to go to bed and they're like, you need to sing happy birthday.
Thank you so much for coming.
yes, thank you. Have a good night.
Do we want teacher code on there too?
I was just thinking that, like, you know, protect their privacy, but code it out in some way.
Right.
Yeah. Cause actually, like, the teacher's name and the student's name is like TMI, like, that's, you just wanna know the instance, you don't wanna know the individual at this point. you
Is
know?
the code, is the actual code like a known number? Like, should we have it come to us changed?
The student code?
No, like, cause we don't need the student code, but like the teacher,
The
like, do
teacher.
you all know your code numbers?
That,
Yeah.
Yeah, so it should
Yeah.
probably be like a
like
diff-
teacher A, teacher B,
Yeah.
something like that.
So we're
yeah.
not like, Sue, why are you doing that?
I wanna be careful, I mean, I think it's good to look for inconsistencies and trends. Some teachers teach all, 14 kid class APs, and some are in
Mhm.
different, yeah, I wanna make sure that.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that I agree with you, like looking at the data as a number with no opinion on it necessarily, like, and
Yeah.
then figuring out, okay, like, oh, I see, like, we just did this with failure rate data, and it's like,
Mhm.
okay, of course I'm seeing that the teachers who have certain classes are gonna
Yes.
have higher numbers, so when we met, we said, what are you seeing, what are the trends you're experiencing, how can we support you, it was like a different, so I agree that we look at it like that,
Like,
but I do think it helps us
How can
see.
we make consistency, not.
Yeah,
It's
not
not
pointing
pointing
the
the
not a
finger.
witch hunt, nope, I agree
And
with
that's
you.
why I was talking about, like, the nuance of, cause you might have a teacher who's writing someone up all the time, cause they're actually following what people said and they didn't know to be like, no,
Yes.
I shouldn't do this. So they're just, maybe they're a new teacher, or maybe they're like really emotionally compromised, and it just is their way of keeping their head above water by just writing it up every day, even though it's not changing, you don't know. Like, I might not do it myself, but, until you're in there, like, seeing this teacher. That's why I always say to the administrators in my building, like, data is great, it's a good question, observation's a good answer,
So is it better to hold off on the teacher number for now and have it added after?
What would we get from it? So I think if we wanna look at it to see, okay, there aren't consistent classroom protocols. Teachers don't have, just like even some of the language is like objectionable language on a thing. Like, okay, so that would be what I think we would get from it. If we wanna know if teachers are, have, different levels of the amount of times that they're kicking kids out or writing kids up, then we say, well, why? Because things aren't they're allowed to, cause it's inconsistent, and then we would deal with it that way. If we think that as a committee that is worthwhile seeing, then yes.
I have a thought, just as I'm hearing you, I almost feel like next steps could be twofold, like, for the committee, I don't know that it's necessary, because I genuinely think we can assume that there's inconsistencies, and that's like where we
Yeah.
function from. And then maybe at the building level, we make it a priority for our principals to look more into that actual data, and then deal with that teaching and learning in the, you know what I'm
Yeah, I
saying?
think that makes sense.
Cause I don't wanna waste the committee's time on those smaller nuances, but I do think that we should go in assuming, cause I can say there's
Probably.
definitely inconsistencies from what I've seen anyway, I can't speak for every other school.
And I don't want the perception to be
Yep.
that we're going
Yep.
after individual teachers,
No.
'cause
Right.
that's
I
not
agree.
this
No.
is.
Not at all.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I agree.
Because I think you're right, some person might be following the letter
Yep.
of
yeah.
the rules.
And seriously, objectionable words or pictures, objection.
that?
What does
right.
that mean?
So we
Right.
already know
Yeah.
That's the
It's
definition.
that
objective.
there's a
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
isn't it
I
like,
agree.
That's what does that
like
mean?
when I went over in the training, I'm like, student flips a desk over in the classroom, this teacher ignores it, waits for the kid to put the desk back up. Same thing happens across the hall, kid flips desk over, teacher sends him out because it's unsafe behavior, goes to the office, the administrator says you're unsafe, you're being suspended.
Yeah.
One doesn't get reported in Aspen because it got solved at the classroom level, but the same infraction happened across the hall. That teacher, well, it was unsafe, I was told to document, I was told to send to the office. They read the matrix and said, well, he was unsafe, so he has to be suspended. The same scenario happened in the same building, but it got handled two different ways. I think that's some of the training that goes on. I'm just trying to peel some of those back, like, to some person, this is insubordinate, he was disrespectful, he flipped the desk over, and other people are like, okay, when you're ready, just put the desk back up. So I mean, I think it's just important sometimes how that gets played out. If this has always happened in the same school, great, we have the behavior classroom in this school, maybe those are why we had more behavior, so I'm just curious into all those things.
Yeah, I'd like to bounce off that. That example that you gave is also an example of the teacher's teaching style and their like opinion on what things they need to like be involved in, and that opinion based is like, cause we can't, there's no way to like figure out every single nuance and define every single one like to a T, cause there's so many different things, but like how are we gonna be able to define stuff, like define the matrix in itself because of how different teachers work in their classrooms. And like there's a difference between like a teacher being biased and like that example that you gave. It like, so just how can we know what's biased and what's just like a different teacher doing different?
My thing would be is if desk bouncer teacher is like letting the desk bounce and letting, you know, it settle in classroom, they let that go for every student, right? Then that's equitable, right?
Yeah.
But if they're writing up certain kids for flipping the
And not
desk
others.
and not others, that's
Well, in
inequitable.
my
Like,
scenario-
that's the way I look at that,
In
right?
my scenario,
Yes.
one teacher lets every kid flip the desk
Right.
over, we handle it the same way, and the teacher across the hall, I'm making these up by the way.
Yeah,
the
no,
extremes
and
of
yes, that's
this-
inequitable from here to
Every
here,
time
right.
someone flips a desk, I don't care who you are, if you're blue and you're a Smurf, you flip the desk over, you go to the office, cause that's what the school conduct says, and it says you get suspended because
Yep.
you're unsafe. Those to me are both equitable.
Yes,
As
I
long as they're
agree.
both happening.
I agree.
I just tend to be the person who would, if they flip the desk over, you don't go to the office, that's just
Right.
what I do, but it's, so in my mind, both of those scenarios are right, but if you're picking and choosing which ones go to the office and which ones don't, then there's the
Right, I
inequity.
agree.
Within the same-
Because like you said, you can't
Okay.
regulate every teaching style, but it's
Yeah.
just, are you handling the same behavior the
Equally.
same way with each student? That to
Exactly.
me is
Yeah.
equitable versus inequitable.
Right. So I'll ask for the equity data to see if it still exists, and then to see, if we can break that data down by infraction and what the infractions are or have been seen.
Yeah.
Do we need that by school?
I think middle and it's combined middle and high school, so I think that's
So just middle and high school?
middle and high school, yeah.
Do we want them separated out, like Woodford versus DMS in the high school and all, like 3 separate numbers to see what the differences are, or?
I mean, the way it comes out of Aspen is that's the way it's coded, like it all
Okay.
comes coded with a school, so
Okay,
they
we can
should be
sort it.
able to do it that way.
Just sort of, okay.
Yeah, and I thought the middle school, the whole point was that one middle school, they have inequity in the 2 middle schools, they wanted to get more uniform, right?
Yeah, there is definitely
So
inequity
that's,
in the two
you know,
middle
that's why we
schools,
probably
yeah.
should have each middle school,
Yeah.
right?
So infraction and result of infraction.
Okay,
I put that next up in the notes.
thank you.
It's hard to capture all this, so if you see errors, please let me know.
Right, and I will probably reach out to some people to say,
I'm pretty good too.
make sure make sure my request is what we wanted, you know, to make sure that I capture everything, because this is not an easy topic, and it's not an easy subject. There's lots of pieces that go in this. But this is probably a good time to go on to the current policies of what we see and what we experience at, you know, we can see it at all I just pulled all schools equally, and I even included Davisville Academy, which I know is a specialized school. But just to see like what is everybody currently doing, you know, and that's where you can see, like we said before, the middle schools have very different approaches, or it appears to be that way anyway. But I will say that in just looking at, if you read the way that Davisville Academy has approached their kind of discipline section of their handbook, myself and my personal preference, it's very positive. and the other schools don't seem to do that. It's noticeable, in my opinion, it's very noticeable about how, you know, Davisville Academy, they wrote it in such a way that, you know, there's lots of opportunity for positive reinforcement, but just the way that discipline is talked about, it's talked about in a very positive light. And the other schools seem to be, you know, if you do this, then you're gonna get punished with this. And it's very,
It's deficit-based versus
yeah,
asset-based.
right, right, and it, you know, and I don't wanna say it's negative, but it just seems, it's very, you know, consequence. And I just think that there's a much more educational, I guess, approach to how we can present this and how we can write these policies as a committee that we go forward. But if you haven't had a chance to
It's
look.
an overall tone.
Right, the tone
Right.
is,
I
I think the
agree.
tone is very, very important because these are student handbooks that students are seeing supposedly and parents are seeing. And, you know, this is everything that I copied, this is out on the internet for the public to see. Everyone can see this and how we handle discipline across the district.
I mean, Davisville Academy and programs like that, obviously, you're trying to work through the issue to try to get a better result as opposed to use your draconianism. We're gonna use suspend you so that we change your
Right.
behavior. So one's not getting your point across, because clearly if suspensions worked, then we would do them, but they don't work, but we keep doing them, because that's what the handbook says we should do.
Yeah,
Right.
and on top of that, it's all students with special needs and their requirements regarding not suspension beyond 10 days.
Right.
I wish we had, in a lot of ways, no suspension unless it's a weapon, drugs,
Well, but
things like that.
it's still at the discretion of me.
You,
That-
yeah.
But I mean, we can have that same thing and still not suspend the kid unless we need to. I mean, sometimes we do, I'm not
But
saying we don't.
you know, all of our students have special needs in one way, shape, or form, so we should be approaching it like from a positive standpoint, like
And
we
carrying
not
some of
all
that
of them
over.
have a documented, you know, disability, like, so, and I think, like, approaching everything from a positive, like, we're working together, and these are how we're gonna move you forward, is way better than this is the hammer we're gonna bring down on you if you don't succeed, is, like, even just like in the elementary one, children must not be willfully disobedient, like, that to me is just like, I mean, they're in kindergarten.
1942.
Yeah, it's very
That's tough,
draconian,
yeah.
I mean,
like.
you could say every middle school boy has ADHD or some type of thing that prevents them from walking a straight line and following a simple direction, but
Yeah.
just because of their age and their brain.
It's just very, and also I noticed while going through these policies that some of the school level policies are woefully out of date. We no longer expel students, so those need to be changed, like,
Well,
regardless.
one of the things that I read was the first policy draft was like 1951, then
Yeah.
revised in 79, then
And like
revised.
22,
Right.
yeah, we're working our way slowly through all the policies, obviously, we haven't gotten to all of them.
Well, and some of our websites need to be updated,
Yeah.
like Fishing Co. still has the previous year's handbook out as opposed to the current year.
I also found that
So-
logistically and litigiously, a lot of them are always like, document informed versus like start a conversation. You know what I mean? Like a lot of times when the parents are involved, it's like, it's already been decided and now we're informing you and you can petition like to have it not happen, but that's very inequitable because you have to be really good at that. So
Right.
I think it would be a better tone that like a lot of our solution might be to like instead of timelining it out, like combining it, like before you make a decision, like make sure everybody's at the table talking, you know, like so right now a lot of our matrix are like teacher files complaint, talks to administrator, then calls home instead of like teacher talk to student and parent, you know, with an administrator, you know what I mean, like, and then talk about the discipline after everybody gave context, cause you know, I know one time I called home and the parent told me, it was like, you know, I have my child help me get my kids ready for school, so they're late because of that, so I'd appreciate if you could give my kids some leeway, and I was like, wow, thanks, you know, like, I definitely did that, but that's only because I followed that model of talking to the parent before I do something. So, like, in a lot of our handbooks, you kinda inform them at
Instead
the
of
end.
including them.
Yeah.
Yep.
From my experience in Davisville Middle School, it seemed very, I'm gonna be real, it seemed like they didn't treat us like we had like opinions on things. Like, it was very strict, like, if, like, we didn't, like, they only knew us what was best for us, and we couldn't, like, think for ourselves.
That's what I wanted to say.
Like, it
was
was-
like, it's like you're not, they don't even talk to the student first to
Yeah.
get their perspective. That's what I don't like. Thank you.
Yeah,
That's
that's
what I
like,
was trying to say.
so, if, I don't know, just, it's very prevalent, at least for when I was there. And I was there, during COVID, so that something might have changed, but I don't know, it's just, like, it just seems like they don't, like, talk to students about anything, so.
Just going back to something we talked about before in terms of like choices for like if you, and I don't know if you were like in the discipline realm, but the choices between like having like a restorative or an educational like choice or like a discipline choice, do you know if those types of things were presented to the students at DMS?
I think it was mostly disciplinary. Like there was no like educational choice, because I think their main thing was this behavior happened, because the behaviors happened very prevalently. Like, the more discipline they enacted, the worse it got. So they just went harder. Like, there was, like, they never thought, because, like, the worse it would get, the least likely the students were to listen to them. Like, I think they thought. Like, because honestly, we were less likely to respect them the more discipline they gave us. So it just kind of snowballed, and so there was really no educational, like,
Benefit.
like, option.
So it didn't work when we suspended you once, so we'll suspend you for 2 days next time.
I never got like any of the harsh punishments, but just like the environment was like very like, I don't know, just like I knew people who got it were like really bad and stuff, and
I
It's very punitive.
suspect that the administration, just my suspicion, the administration perspective of the building would be that if they didn't let up, then it would be, the behavior would be worse.
yeah, I can
They
see
didn't
like I
want
can
the
see where they're
building
coming
to
from,
get out of
but-
control,
Yeah.
and they felt that, this is my guess, they felt if they really hammered down the discipline and followed through, regardless of what that was,
Yeah.
that would maintain the safety within the building.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of fear of letting some of that ease. Cause they're afraid
But they're not
that the
like
teaching.
looking
buildings will
back,
go
I
amok.
can see that perspective
But
on
they're
it.
not teaching the students other ways to go about it, and so,
Oh, I'm not saying that,
No,
I'm
I'm
just
just-
trying,
so I'm thinking the
Trying to
kid
be
kept doing the same
empathetic as
thing
to
over
what
and
I've
over
seen
again, so
happen.
the administration kept doing the same thing
Yeah.
over, and we never
Right.
had a conversation that says, what can you change, what can I change?
Yeah, exactly.
there's I think a lot of fear, to be honest, of making change, and with the fear that then things will get out of control and they'll be held accountable.
Yeah. I can see that. It's just like
Yeah.
something I've observed, and like
Yeah.
how can we change that?
But you're probably right, the harder you go, the worse it gets.
Yeah, yeah.
Right, I understand what you're saying, but I also think from that perspective, that's what happens for many of our folks,
I also just
which
like,
is understandable.
systemically get irritated that you have something on the books that you're never going to do, so then don't have it. You know what I mean? Like, that's the big thing that with that systemic need of change is like you have something you're never gonna use and you're never gonna do, and then it makes everybody just question the whole environment because the students know you're not gonna do it, you know you're not gonna do it, the teacher knows you're not gonna do it, so everybody's just kinda, it's almost like you're a babysitter threatening the child with punishment that if the parents don't follow through on, then nothing's ever gonna happen, so, you know, so. I just don't know why you would keep it on the books, you know, if you're never gonna use it, that's my,
The old matrix that was
Yeah.
there.
like,
I've also seen matrices being used too strictly. I don't have to put this like to the letter of that matrix without thinking about the student.
They're not rational, they're not.
And that's always, anytime my visceral response to the word matrix is, oh no, we're
Yeah.
gonna get if then, which I'm not, again, I think is how we all frame it,
Yeah.
the framing of it, we get if then. And that means there doesn't seem to be any choice or or nuance regarding looking at the student, like in your case of the student helping the kids
Yeah.
get ready
Well, that
in the
was
morning.
like, when you
Like,
say matrix, I also get triggered, because one time I had a student who was bullied by another student, and they literally kept coming to class upset, and then they fought back, and they both got suspended, and
Yes.
like, and they ignored the whole context of it. Like, I literally had to go down the VP at the time of discipline, and it was like 15 years ago, and I'm like, why are they both suspended? I'm like, this other person has been documenting that they're being bullied. They just got pushed too far, and they retaliated, and they're getting the same punishment. I was just flabbergasted by that.
Is there a word other than matrix, since it seems like it gives half the people in the room the heebie-jeebies?
Yeah,
It
does
does
maybe.
Maybe, I don't
framework,
disagree
I think
with
maybe
you.
framework,
Framework.
a disciplinary
Framework,
framework.
yeah.
Yeah, because that's what I had I ran an ALP for the high school. And, you know, my students didn't go to the office, cause that's where they had fun. You know, that's where their friends were. I didn't want them to go there. We solved the problems in the classroom. But I had a bad incident where a student was called a really vulgar name in the hallway, and instead of punching the student, which is what he would have done 6 months before, he punched through one of the windows with chicken wire all the way through the chicken wire. And he received a I wouldn't have punished him for that, but they decided that in his best interest, they would file charges of property destruction, because that's how he could get help. So I said, putting a kiddo who happened to be African American into the legal system, that's how you think he's gonna get help? Versus the fact that making the choice to punch the window was much better than all the choices he was doing up to then. I still smart from that, obviously, you know, I think about that. That was a completely unfair, and I thought discriminatory practice, and absolutely against what I wanted for that kid. No context taken in place. Well, that's how we'll get him help. No, that's not how you get a kid help.
So maybe
Put it in the
matrix
system.
off the table.
No,
Don't use
because
it.
that's like,
Matrix word off
we
the
don't want it
table.
to be like a
Framework, no,
negative
that's
thing,
framework,
like,
right,
so
right,
I think
that's,
right.
framework is a nice way, because then if you have something as a frame, there's also choice within the frame.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, cause we don't wanna limit teachers to not
No.
have
Right.
No,
the
and-
ability to use their professional judgment. And like, I was at a thing the other day where they were talking about like accountability, and like a teacher made a really great point about like, hold me accountable for using my professional judgment.
Yeah.
And like, teachers have great
Yes.
professional
Yes.
judgment and like should have the ability to use it, like in those cases. So I think it's important that it not be, yeah, it's a if then that, but not so tightly prescribed that there is no leeway, so.
Yeah, because some of the things, like the way their words, like loud and boisterous, like, sometimes, am I just annoyed by that, but it's actually not harming anyone's learning?
Right.
Right,
There's like,
right.
I feel like there's the real thing is, are you harming the learning environment?
Right.
Teachers can figure that out.
Or are you
Yeah.
just annoyed because you're not following exactly what the teacher
So
said?
that, I don't wanna, that's too loud, yeah, or
Yeah.
you're not doing as I said, I don't know,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
So when we think about the disciplinary matrix versus the disciplinary framework, I like tend to think, again, the discipline without the restorative piece, and I think I keep going back to this, that behavioral piece. And like, so the definition of discipline is like the practice of training people to obey rules or a code of behaviors, like it's like draconian, you know? And, so with this SCL committee, like it's not a school committee chaired, it's not like.
No, it's not one of these committees,
Yeah,
because
it's
they
not
don't
one of-
determine curriculum yet.
But what, as a discipline, looking at the disparity in, you know, students who are being disciplined, is it that they're not being maybe do they not have the tools that the kids, I'm looking at my chart here, like, do the kids who are like 3 times, 7 times more likely, are they coming to school with the skills they need to demonstrate the behavior that we are expecting of them? Is the behavior different in different communities or cultures? It's an NK community, so, I mean, does the NK police report reflect the discipline of like, just how far is it? Like, how?
I think we can look for things within the handbooks that we can all identify as being like, this is just because we don't, you know, generally in our society right now, like that to happen. But if we really look at, not necessarily, we should look at the child and the root cause for any like outbursts and behavior and so on. But I see us also as looking at the adult who's making a judgment on those behaviors and leaning a little bit more towards like culturally responsive practices and like that kind of a lens for the equity part of what I think. Does that make sense? If,
I think that.
I didn't really understand that, to be honest.
like instead of saying, well, why does this child act in this way, maybe we start by saying, is that actually a problem?
Right.
You know, is that actually, what is the adult in the room making a judgment on that behavior, or making a judgment on why that student would do that in the moment, rather than saying, can we make it so that the child understands more how to act the way we want them to? We say, oh, well, maybe we can accept actually that kind of behavior.
Yeah.
Is that,
Right, so that's important for adults to reflect on, like, is it me that, yes,
yeah.
I agree, but if it's like the student saying, I can't learn in your classroom,
Mm-hmm.
they're always so loud, you don't do anything about it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The other thing too with the teacher aspect is, like I use an analogy for jobs. Like I always say to my students, if you get a new job and boss A makes you employee of the month and boss B wants to fire you, one of those bosses is not doing a good job, because you should not have that big of a difference. And I feel like that with your example, like if teacher A is letting a kid like throw a desk and nothing happens, and teacher B is letting you throw a desk, when you throw a desk you get kicked out of the class, that seems to be like too big of a difference with teachers. And I get like style and stuff, but like with something like, I don't know, that seems to be like a big difference. It's not like a nuanced humanity, like slight difference. Like maybe if this kid has their head down and teacher A like gives them detention and teacher B just tells them to like wake up, that's not a big difference. But like if it's something really big like a safety or like punching a kid or swearing at a kid, you know what I mean, and you have two teachers handle it different, that to me seems like an issue. Like because like when students are going in between classes, that's a really different experience. Like that, it's kind of, the teacher really shouldn't have the teachers in a building shouldn't have that big of a difference. Is basically long
I
story
think
short.
Joe's coming from the Davisville Academy approach and a behavioral approach of working with kids with special needs and things like that. So we spend a lot of time together, Joe and I, doing safety care training
Yeah.
for the district. And we just talking about the 3 definitions of disruptive, dangerous, and very dangerous behaviors was very interesting with people's perspective what that means. And it's very clear what it is in safety care. But they came up with all these different, really good conversation, nothing wrong about the conversation, nuances of that. Like for instance, if a kid is under the table, like especially a little kid is under a table and they're kicking the table, what is that? Well, we would define that as disruptive. If they're now kicking the table and it's hurting kids, now it's dangerous and could potentially get very dangerous. But there's a lot of actions that were occurring for disruptive behaviors that wouldn't be the intervention until someone was very dangerous. So there were some nuances in there. So I equate that experience with these, like different people's perspective of what is considered to be disruptive, insubordinate, or other things that we use.
The definition.
Disrespectful, I think.
Disrespectful, that was the other one, the other dis.
I know, how you feel.
Just one other thing, because I think
So
I
it's
wanna
just
make
something
sure
to think about, there's a lot of interesting thinking.
everybody understands the numbers that we're talking about. So the numbers that are reflected in the audit are a risk ratio number. And so the risk ratio analysis method compares the likelihood of a student in a certain demographic subgroup to have a particular educational outcome to the likelihood that students of all other demographic subgroups will have the same outcome. So a risk ratio of 1 means there's no association between the student's demographic group and their likelihood of receiving a disciplinary referral. A risk ratio of 2.0 or greater indicates a risk of overrepresentation in disciplinary referrals. So if you look at the first one, at risk referral by race. So our black students have 2.52,
What page are you on? Sorry.
49. So our black students are 2.5 times more likely to be disciplined. And our white students are underrepresented because they're at 0.49. So, and then if you scroll down to, same thing with free and reduced lunch, but it's most striking if you look at the suspension risk. 7 times more likely to be suspended, 8, so it doesn't matter what the behavior is, how it's viewed or whatever, just their risk of being disciplined is higher just by race, by free and reduced lunch, by IEP, so.
Male, female.
Male, female, like, so it's not about what the behavior is, it's the mere fact of their subgroup makes them at higher risk for the discipline. Yeah, males are 2.5 times more likely to be suspended, females are underrepresented. So I just think it's free and reduced lunch 6 times more, so it's just important to, again, it doesn't matter what the offense is or who it is, it's just strict numbers. And that's why we're here. And yes, I'm gonna say that at every meeting in case anybody wonders.
So, and then we're getting to the close of this discussion. But I would encourage people to, I'm gonna, when I have a few minutes, try to look at what other schools in Rhode Island are doing, what schools in New England are doing, just trying to look at other kind of discipline policies that they have in place. So if you're looking and you have 5 minutes on the weekend or at night, one night, or you wake up in the middle of the night, you just can't sleep and you wanna do something, feel free to send me links, send me, say, hey, this was very interesting to me. So then, we can put it on the next agenda if we wanna talk about it and just kind of get a comparison of what other schools are doing compared to what we're currently doing here. Cause I think at some point we need to start, and there may be, I don't know if RIASC may have some data or ability to poll school committees or.
I will certainly ask on Saturday.
Yeah, and that would be interesting to know if there's a way that we can easily reach out to the other school committees and say, hey, can you send us what your discipline policies are as far as district-wide? And, is there something that's like, the gold star standard that, we wanna look at it, even countrywide, if there's something that some school is doing that they're getting a lot of recognition for. I know Jen had sent me an article about a school in Greensboro, North Carolina, which just happens to be my home state. But things like that, please feel free to send them along so I can, include them and read them and then we can talk about them at the next meeting. Cause I think it would be, worthwhile for us to start looking at some of that as well. So, anything else? Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. All right, thank you very much, everyone. I will turn off the camera and then
Just give me some extras.
thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you for coming.
I'm sending you one right now, Rob.